Welcome everyone to theScore Fantasy Football Podcast presented by Subway. I'm your host, Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at theScore. Joining me today is theScore's David P. Woods, a man who apparently can't wear his wedding ring ever again because of an injury that occurred during a touch football game. And that is, according to your wife. I got that straight from the source. I didn't get any more details than that. So is today the day? Do we get a whole story about this?
I mean, it's not a very interesting story. I'll try to show my finger up to the camera. I don't know if you can see. It's kind of crooked. It's not like Torrey Holt's level crooked or anything. But yeah, I mean, touch football, you get hand injuries, you jam your finger. I don't think my wife was very happy about the idea that my wedding ring will never fit me again. But we bought one that you can't resize. It's like titanium or something, and I'm going to go without, I think, for the rest of my life, maybe.
So, yeah. I rarely wear my wedding ring, and when I do, I feel like it always ends up on like the desk next to me. I take it off while I'm typing or whatever, which has led to me forgetting it in the office at least once, and I had to drive back at the end of the night to get it. I feel like that was the right decision. So, I mean, I think not wearing the wedding ring isn't that big of a deal. I think losing the wedding ring probably would have been, so I'm glad that I came back and got it.
I don't think I know where mine is, but it's probably in my house somewhere.
I don't think you should admit that on the podcast.
Luckily, I wasn't wearing it when I got hurt, or they would have had to cut my finger off or something. Yeah.
All right, on today's episode, I'm going to give you a quick look at some of the updates that are going to be in my rankings on Thursday, and then we're going to preview Week 4 and all of the games on the slate with Jeff Ratcliffe of Pro Football Focus. He is one of the best in the industry, and we're going to find out exactly what he thinks about all the matchups this weekend and all the big storylines that are facing fantasy owners. Before we get to all that, though, if you like what you're hearing, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. Even my parents recently subscribed, and they couldn't believe how much easier it was to get the podcast after doing it. My dad always listens to every episode, so shout out to Gord Boone out there. He's at home recovering from some recent surgery. Follow his lead, though. Follow his lead, subscribe to the podcast, and once you do, give us a quick rating, give us a quick review. We really appreciate it. So as I mentioned, my latest rankings are going to be available on theScore on Thursday. But I want to take a first look at some of the notable risers and fallers that you're going to see in our next level update segment, which is presented by our friends at Subway, who upped the taste ante with their new next level paninis. The first player that I'm going to mention is Matthew Stafford. He falls down to QB 13 for me. I don't think I took into account enough just how good the Cowboys' pass defense has been this year. They held Cam Newton and Russell Wilson to 161 yards and 192 yards, respectively. They're going to be back at home in this one. I think keep an eye out on the line on this game, too. It's actually pretty low after seeing, the Lions' offense and some of their passing weapons and Kerryon Johnson coming on a little bit. It's pretty low at 43.5. So all of those things considered, I bumped him down a little bit. Next up, Odell Beckham. You don't need me to tell you that Odell Beckham is a great fantasy receiver, one of the best in the game, but his owners are probably a little bit disappointed. He doesn't have a touchdown this year. I went out, I tried to trade for him in a couple leagues. I got him in one league this week. I recommend that you would float an offer out there for him too, just to test the waters, see how that owner's feeling, because his fantasy points might be a little lower than usual because of the lack of touchdowns, but he's still 9th in the league in targets. He has 200-yard outings already, and now he's getting the Saints, and they're going to be missing Patrick Robinson, one of their corners. He got placed on IR this week, and Beckham has been getting a little more work in the slot this year, so I've moved him up into my top 3 receivers for Week 4. And the final player I'm going to mention in this segment is Austin Eckler. You've heard me talk about him before. The Chargers are huge double-digit favorites over the C.J. Beathard-led 49ers now. Last time we saw the Chargers dominate a game, it was in Week 2 against the Bills. Eckler had a lot more work in that game. He had 11 carries, 77 yards, 3 catches, 21 yards. His chances of finding the end zone in this one are definitely heightened. I've moved him up 4 spots, I believe, 4 spots to RB28. He is an excellent flex play this week. If you want to see the rest of my rankings, the full update, including all the changes, including the ones we just mentioned, are going to be available on Thursday on theScore. Our guest today is another one of the biggest names in the industry. We wouldn't have it any other way. It's Jeff Ratcliffe, the Director of Fantasy at Pro Football Focus. You can find him on Twitter at Jeff Ratcliffe. Jeff, can you believe we are already talking about Week 4? I feel like training camp was last week.
Yeah, it definitely goes fast. I feel like the draft was last week. We were just down there in Dallas getting excited about some of these guys coming off the board. You blink, and then here we are Week 4. But Hey, I love it. I love it's all these little sprints crammed into a gigantic marathon, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. You talked about sprints. Let's get right to it. Let's start off with, I think, probably my favorite place, and that's talking about Aaron Jones. He was hurt for part of the preseason. He was suspended for the first 2 games, but things went exactly as expected, at least how I expected, and that's specifically Jamal Williams not really doing much against the tough run defenses of the Bears and the Vikings in those first 2 weeks. And then last week, Jones returns. Mike McCarthy says he's going to be the 3rd running back, and he was, but he also led the backfield. He had the most rushing yards of anyone on the Packers last week. So I'm looking at this backfield now, and I'm wondering, going up against the Bills, is this finally the time that we see Jones start to take over the Packers backfield? Or, Jeff, do you foresee this remaining a 3-headed committee?
It's still a 3-headed committee. There's no doubt in my mind there. You have to look at it. I mean, if Jamal Williams stunk up the joint, then sure, Aaron Jones, it's your job. But Jamal Williams last year was one of the best pass-blocking running backs in the NFL. He also, even though he didn't put up the yardage this past week, I thought he played fine. You know, there was no volume for anybody in that backfield. We know that Montgomery's going to continue to be that hybrid, essentially player that he always has been and be the receiving option out of the backfield. But this team is going to use all 3 of these guys. So any excitement that you have for Aaron Jones, I don't necessarily share that. And for fantasy purposes, what I keep telling people is you got to own him. There's no sense in having him out on the waiver wire in a 12-team league. But I can't trust him yet, especially even in this crazy matchup. Everybody can run against the Bills, well, except Latavius Murray on all of my DFS teams this week. But everybody can run against them. I think you have some upside potential here, but nowhere near we're nowhere near the point of trusting Aaron Jones in starting lineups.
Woods, we've talked about this a few times. What do you think?
I mean, I'm just going to let Mike McCarthy, Packers head coach, put it in his words. He said this week, I really like the rotation of having all 3 guys because they're distinctly different, but all 3 can play all 3 downs, and that says a lot. I mean, I think he's committed to playing all 3 running backs right now, and sort of like you've said, Aaron Jones just needs to separate from the pack, and it didn't happen in week 3, but maybe we saw the first glimpse of it. If he keeps performing as a rusher better than the rest, I think they can't justify not putting him on the field, even if he has some weakness as a pass blocker. The Packers is an offense that just needs weapons right now. It feels weird to say, but they don't have a ton of explosive players, and they're sort of missing that spark. And if it came from the rushing attack, that would really help things, especially with Aaron Rodgers fighting through that injury. So I think I take the same stand. I mean, you got to own him. I think he's easily the most interesting out of that backfield, but I wouldn't feel good playing him right now. And you sort of have to root against the other 2 running backs, or Jones may it won't happen for him this season.
I agree that he probably needs to stay on your bench this week, but speaking of DFS, I feel like I'm going to have at least one lineup where he's going to be in it just to see what happens. You never know. Another team that's used a very frustrating 3-man committee to start the year is the Lions, and everyone's got to be excited about Kerryon Johnson after he had his first 100-yard game last week. He's a player I know Woods and I have talked about a lot. We've really been on him since the offseason. It's important to point out, though, that he had 16 carries last week, but so did LeGarrette Blount. So Blount, he only had 48 yards with his, so he only averaged 3 yards per carry, and Kerryon averaged 6.3 yards per carry. I have to think that Matt Patricia, that this is going to be a situation where the coaching staff is going to see the light. Jeff, tell me I'm not wrong on this one too.
Well, I think you might not be looking close enough. Yards per carry is not a good metric. We know that, and
sure.
One of the biggest factors that impacts yards per carry is the defense that the running back is facing. That's why Todd Gurley stunk up the joint under Jeff Fisher because he was running against base defenses every down. And then last year broke out and was the Todd Gurley that everybody thought he was going to be because he was basically running against sub-package defense all the time, 80% of the time, in fact, last year, which is remarkable because this year he has yet to face base defense. Now, if we look at last week, Kerryon Johnson, 15 snaps against sub-package, LeGarrette Blount, 9. So 7 of Blount's 9 snaps came against base defense. That extra linebacker on the field makes a difference, or the other way around, the extra defensive back or 2 on the field makes a huge difference for these guys. So, of course, Johnson had an advantage on his carries that Blount didn't have in some instances there. So I don't know if we can just read into that. And also, we have to know the player. Is Kerryon Johnson the type of player who can step into the NFL and handle 20 to 25 touches a game? No. And he said that himself in the pre-draft process. He said, I view myself as a committee back. So that's the rub ultimately with Kerryon Johnson. Can he ultimately emerge as an RB1 in fantasy? I don't think so. Could he be an RB2 with weekly RB1 upside? Yes, we know the upside, but just to simply think that they're going to hand the keys over, the Lions coaching staff has to know that he was running with an advantage against sub-package defenses.
So are you leaving him on your bench this week like Aaron Jones?
Yeah, I am actually. In ordinary leagues, I'm going to keep Kerryon on the bench. If I'm in, obviously deeper leagues, then you're going to be hard pressed at the running back position. So then I will be starting him in those formats.
All right, sticking with running backs, is there a running back out there who has disappointed fantasy owners through the first 3 weeks, but who you believe has a chance to turn things around here?
I think David Johnson has to head that list. It's a pretty easy one because it's not as if David Johnson forgot how to play football in the first 3 weeks of the season. In fact, I think he's been fine. It's just the team stunk up the joint with Sammy Sleeves at quarterback. That wasn't any good. And we've seen the impact. Obviously, we didn't really get – Rosen was put into a brutal situation, right? So we don't really know what Rosen's going to be just yet. But we've seen the impact of Josh Allen on the Buffalo Bills this past week, this spark that he gave that team. We saw Baker Mayfield, the spark that he gave his team. And I think we're going to see a similar phenomenon here with Rosen, with a more capable quarterback who we know Rosen, where he excels is in the short and intermediate areas of the field. He sometimes, he can be aggressive to a fault, but that's a good thing. And ultimately, it's going to be more stability here. So a lot of people panicking about David Johnson. And one of the worst things you can do at this time of year is try and trade David Johnson. Like that, to me, just does not compute because we want to buy low, sell high, not the other way around. And that's exactly what a lot of folks are doing with David Johnson, pushing that panic button. So I think if we see him get more involved, I don't know if he's going to be that much of a force in the run game just because the offensive line woes and the overall state of the team. But if they get him more involved in that passing game, then he will rebound. I think he has a bit of a bounce back week this week, and then it continues going forward.
And we have a couple teams this week that are going to be starting new quarterbacks, and hopefully they can get a spark. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Woods, you got a disappointing running back you think could turn it around?
Well, I'll just rattle through a few that I think should be probably pretty obvious. Second-year guys who've been hurt, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, I think all those guys have injuries that they're going to get over. Maybe you're a little bit more worried about Mixon's, but I think there's no reason to panic on those guys. Those are just early season, nicks. They'll get over them. I still think Royce Freeman's the guy I want to have in Denver. I think his talent, his sort of workhorse attributes, he will lead him to be the guy who eventually emerges from that pack there. I sort of look at it like a Bears situation last year with Tariq Cohen and Jordan Howard. Like Freeman's sort of more of the late season when the weather gets cold kind of running back. So I'm weathering the storm with him there. And another one that I have plenty of patience for still is Sony Michel, whose path to relevance opened up a lot today with news that Rex Burkhead's going on IR.
I absolutely agree with the Michel thing. We talked about it before the season. Patriots finished top 10 in rushing yards the last 2 years. I think that there's a good chance they're going to be able to turn it around, but maybe that's a question we should ask right now. It's going to require that Patriots offense to get back on track if we're hoping that Michel is going to be able to deliver here. And, so far it hasn't looked great. We've seen this from the Patriots early in the season before. Jeff, do you think, Josh Gordon probably making his Patriots debut this week, it seems, Julian Edelman coming back next week after suspension. Do you think that's enough to help cure this offense?
Yeah, it absolutely is, because when those guys aren't on the field, who do you have to stop? You have to stop one player. You have to stop Rob Gronkowski, right? Are you that worried about Chris Hogan? And sure, 7-Eleven, he's always open, but are we that worried about him? No. So you stop one player, you can really keep that offense in check. And we saw Matt Patricia do exactly that in the Lions this past week. But you get Josh Gordon on the field, you're going to have to stop him. Now you got to stop him and Gronk. Then you get Edelman on the field, you're going to have to stop him. If you try and stop Gordon and Gronk, Edelman's going to kill you over the middle all day long. And then that is ultimately going to open up the run game. I agree 100%. Sony Michel has been one of my favorite rookies this year, and I've stayed the course and recommended folks staying the course with him. Now with the news with Rex Burkhead, I mean, this is his backfield, and we saw, when did the breakout happen for Alvin Kamara last year? Kind of in week 4. Adrian Peterson was still on the team, but Kamara actually showed a little bit of a spark, and then right after that, as soon as Peterson was gone, the breakout happened. It was an October breakout. I think we could see the exact same thing, and ironically enough, we saw in the pre-draft process who was Michel comp to Alvin Kamara.
Absolutely. Woods, you agree? Patriots are going to be able to turn it around here?
Yeah, I think so. I still have some reservations about how much value that will mean for Josh Gordon. I wonder if maybe he's going to start being used as more of a decoy than anything, but I think it will certainly help open up things for the rest of the offense, Tom Brady and the rest of the guys.
So let's talk about a team that has a direct link to the Patriots here. Brady's former backup, Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously one of the biggest storylines last week. Garoppolo's injury, very, very unfortunate for him, for the 49ers organization. You know, that's a team that I think had their sights set on potentially being a playoff team this year. It's also a big blow for fantasy owners. Not just those that had Garoppolo, but anyone who owned a piece of that offense. Jeff, is there still value to be mined in San Francisco with CJ Beathard at the helm, or is it time to cut bait on our 49ers?
Yeah, I think maybe George Kittle, maybe, just because tight end is absolutely terrible like usual. Every year its tight end is so brutal, so maybe you have a volume play there. I'm not in on Marquise Goodwin any longer, and Pierre Garçon obviously is on his last legs anyway. Maybe Matt Breida, because he just has such big play upside, but the problem with him is he's not a volume running back. So this is just, it's absolutely brutal. I feel so bad for fans out there of this team, because now we're going to see them circle the drain this year. They can, obviously it's the NFL, they could win a few games, but for the most part with Beathard under center, that offense is a complete liability. Now, of course, I always say that in these sort of fantasy tragedies, there is opportunity, and the opportunity for us now is we know who we're streaming against every single week with our team defenses. Chargers this week, love it, and even a shorthanded Chargers defense is still a premium play.
And for the IDP players out there, you can go grab your 49ers, because their defense is going to be on the field quite a bit here. Garoppolo's injury came against one of the hottest teams in the league. It was probably pretty tough for the 49ers fans to watch, because I think the 49ers fans probably thought their team was going to be doing what the Chiefs are doing this year. Looking at that team, I mean, they have just been phenomenal. Mahomes appears as though he can do no wrong. 13 touchdowns, NFL record through 3 games. He's going to get his toughest test so far this season, though, in week 4. They're on the road Monday night against the Broncos. I'm not going to waste too much time leading into this one. I think we all know how good this offense has been. So are the Broncos the team that finally finds a way to slow Mahomes and that Chiefs offense down?
If it's directed to me, I do not think so. I think the only thing at this point that's going to slow Mahomes down is Mahomes himself. If he gets into some of his bad habits from the college level, and let's be clear, you look at his college stats and you say, where's the bad habits? These numbers are insane. They look like a video game. But the bad habit was often that he didn't run the play that was called, and he was just better than everybody else. I mean, think about some of the guys who left. They saw this dude walk in the building. They're like, I'm out of here. Baker Mayfield left. Like Davis Webb left because he was in the building. So Mahomes is a freak of nature, but what I love about him and what you're seeing about him over the first 3 weeks of the season is the development over last year. He was so fortunate to land in a situation where there was an established starter with a head coach who knows how to coach quarterbacks, and it looks like he really took to that coaching because he has the improvisational ability. Of course, that's never going to go away, but he's running the plays. You know, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. So I think as of now, that's the only thing that's going to stop him. And I don't think this version of the Broncos defense is going to do so.
Yeah, I think I concur. I wonder if maybe the only thing that can slow Mahomes down is just like hubris. Like he's almost so aggressive that Andy Reid needs to reel him in maybe a little bit and teach him to check down. Like, it seems absurd to say that that's the kind of thing you need to work on in your offense, the ability to just pull things back and play a little bit more conservatively. And that's maybe even not a fair criticism of him because he's just been so good. And I'm sure he could throw dump off passes to his running back if he wanted to. He's just choosing not to because other stuff's available to him. I mean, the scheme is just so good. Guys are running wide open all the time. I know this is a fantasy football podcast, and I hate to look ahead till after the season, but it's almost like the Chiefs are already at the point where they can start planning for beyond the regular season, and they have their faults in the playoffs, and things always kind of fall apart. So they have a lot of time to work on it. I don't really see any reason that it should slow down their fantasy numbers, though.
How about the opposite side of the spectrum? There have been some really bad offenses this season, but I think we expected it from a few of the teams. We didn't necessarily expect it from the Bears when they brought Matt Nagy in, when they signed a few quality free agents, Allen Robinson, Trey Burton, a couple others. They brought in Taylor Gabriel. It seems like Mitch Trubisky is the one that's holding this offense back right now. Jeff, do you think that there's reason to believe that they can get it right, that maybe this is a learning curve in Nagy's system, or should we just be concerned about all our Bears assets?
We should somewhat for this season, but I think anybody who anticipated the Bears to immediately go out and be one of the top teams in the NFL weren't necessarily paying attention to what we've seen. I mean, we saw, okay, so this is an Andy Reid offense. This is, very similar to what we saw Doug Peterson put in place in Philadelphia. And his first year, he had a losing season. Second year, won the Super Bowl. So I'm not saying the Bears are going to go out and win the Super Bowl next year, but I do expect a year-over-year improvement. This is year one. This is a pretty big departure from that very boring offense that they were running last year. And Trubisky has some developing to do. So obviously it always starts and ends at the quarterback, but I don't think we should just pack in on Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson is still going to see a lot of targets. On Trey Burton, who his athleticism, his role in that offense that's all favorable. And even Jordan Howard, I'm not a big Jordan Howard supporter. The efficiency numbers certainly show that this year, but the volume number is the more important thing. And I'm a sucker for volume in fantasy, 21 touches per game over the first 3 weeks. So I think, if anything, you have Jordan Howard there. I know a lot of people are also frustrated with Tariq Cohen, but you have to know who you drafted. Sometimes people just draft players and don't really know who that player is. I mean, he's an undersized athletic freak, but he's not a guy who's going to carry the ball 15 times or more a game. So I think ultimately, though, if you have Jordan Howard, I think you'll be fine. If you have Allen Robinson, you'll be fine. The Mitch Trubisky breakout, I think we're probably a year ahead on that one.
Seems like it. And yeah, Robinson, the targets are there. I mentioned Beckham as a guy that maybe you should go out and see if you can float a trade offer for. Robinson's 18th in the league in targets. And with Anthony Miller hurt, we could see him used in the slot even more coming up here. I like him as a wide receiver too, and he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this season, so I think he might be devalued a little bit. I shouldn't be saying that because I believe Woods has him in our main league together, and I should probably be trying to get him from Woods here. But he's a player that I think you should be out there trying to trade for. Trubisky, he got kind of thrown into the fire during his rookie season after Mike Glennon kind of fell on his face. We're seeing similar situations. We mentioned some of the guys earlier. You brought up Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, going to get his first start. We saw Sam Darnold come in. We saw Josh Allen. They've both taken over their offenses. They're not really fantasy relevant, though, not in redraft leagues anyway, maybe in 2 quarterback leagues. The jury is still out here, on both of Baker and Rosen. They're kind of a mystery box at this point. So are they guys we saw with Baker? He came into that game. He showed a lot more. And Rosen was thrown into a very difficult situation, obviously, with 5 minutes left in the game and asking him to come back and engineer a game-winning drive there. But personally, I'm more interested in Mayfield with the weapons and what I think could be the outcome there in that Cleveland offense. I know you spoke about thinking the Cardinals could turn it around here, but do you think that either of these guys has a chance to become fantasy relevant or potentially fantasy starters as the season goes on?
Possibly Baker. I really don't think that it's in the cards for Rosen this year, and I've said that over the course of Rosen's career, I think the numbers, when it's all said and done, are going to be, at least from a fantasy standpoint, are going to be very similar to what we saw out of Eli Manning over the course of his career. So Eli never really an elite fantasy option, obviously, but there have been times where he's flirted with back-end quarterback 1 value. That's, I think, what we'll get out of Rosen. Whereas Baker, I mean, Baker could be an absolute stud. He could be a top-end fantasy quarterback down the line, because obviously we have this changing of the guard that's eventually going to happen. Eventually Brady will retire. Eventually Breeze will retire. Eventually Rivers will retire. Big Ben, etc. And eventually these guys will be the next, group at the position. But this year, the thing that I at least like about him is he's surrounded by a lot of talent. You obviously have Jarvis there. You have Antonio Callaway, who gives you that field stretching ability with his elite speed. You have Njoku, who gives you upside. You have Duke Johnson, who gives you one of the best pass catching backs out of the backfield. Even Carlos Hyde, who's not too shabby in that area. So there's a lot of things working to his favor. It's a matter of the offense gelling, of him remaining calm and playing the way that he played in that first game. And if he can do that, there are going to be some weeks, especially during the bye weeks, where I think Baker could surface as a back-end quarterback one.
And not to say that he's going to come on and, be Cam Newton in his rookie season or something like that, but that possibility is there. We saw Newton really go undrafted in most leagues and then get picked up early in the season and be an impact player as a rookie. And Baker's sort of taken a little bit different of a path here, but it's definitely possible. Jeff, before we let you go, a couple quick hitters here. Which of the young breakout candidate wide receivers do you most like moving forward here? And many of them were available on the waiver wire this week. That's why this is top of mind. Guys like Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin, Tyler Boyd, Sterling Shepard. You could throw Geronimo Allison in there. There's also some guys that just haven't stepped up yet, like a Corey Davis, who's definitely rostered, I would think, in most leagues, but he's having a little bit of struggles in that Titans offense. If you want to go even deeper, we could include names like Callaway, who you just brought up, James Washington, Cortland Sutton, Christian Kirk. There are a lot of guys this year. Out of that list, are there any of them, now it doesn't have to just be one, it could be a couple, who you think are going to go on to have breakout seasons?
Well, it's a tricky question, because obviously Calvin Ridley's the name on a lot of folks' minds right now, but we have to remember he's the number 3 wide receiver in Atlanta, and he took advantage of P.J. Williams. He ate P.J. Williams' lunch, 10 routes, and he put up over 100 yards on 4 catches and 2 touchdowns against P.J. Williams. Yeah, P.J. Williams this week, by the way. Sterling Shepard, I see you. He's going after him as well. But Sterling Shepard, the number 2, and when Evan Ingram's there, really kind of the number 4 almost target because of how heavily Saquon's been used. I love the way Tyler Boyd plays. Not a ton of upside with him, but a number 2 as well. Mike Williams kind of emerging as a number 2. Chris Godwin, he's kind of the number 4 by routes run, but the number 2 by targets. It's a weird thing going on there. Geronimo Allison, only 4 targets last week, the number 3 receiver there. Antonio Callaway, the number 2, double-digit targets, but that continued. James Washington, number 3. Cortland Sutton, a number 3. Christian Kirk, a number 3/4. I think the answer should be Corey Davis. And that's the problem here. It should be Corey Davis, because he is the number 1. And he's the only one on that entire list that you gave me that is the number 1 receiver for his respective team. But that team obviously is impacted initially here by Marcus Mariota. If Mariota can be healthy, if they can actually run Matt LaFleur's offense, and Corey Davis gets out of bad matchups, then I don't see any reason why he's not going to break out. However, it's a tricky one. I think of that group, though, and I gave you all the reasons why not to like some of those guys. I still think it's Corey Davis, and the beauty to him is you can buy him on the cheap right now.
For sure, 100%. Looking specifically at week 4, as we wrap things up here, which player or players are being overlooked heading into this weekend's games fantasy-wise?
Ooh, man. Overlooked is always tricky because, there's a lot of groupthink for sure in fantasy football. I think, if you look at the quarterback position, maybe Andy Dalton, just because the Atlanta defense is so banged up and obviously, coming off of last week with all those points scored. The problem there, of course, though, is whether or not you'll have A.J. Green on the field. So, maybe not him. I think James White gets a little overlooked, kind of constantly overlooked, but now he's going to be on the field a lot. He's not going to carry the ball much, but he's going to get his targets, especially this week. This is the last of the get in while Edelman's not on the field with James White. So I think he might be overlooked a bit this week. I guess those guys are probably the 2 biggest who stand out to me because there's a lot of hot names this week. And a lot of those guys have shot up in terms of rankings, but James White always seems just, a little bit down in rankings. And I mean, we saw last week, he scores touchdowns, he gets receptions, he works that short and intermediate area of the field for the Patriots.
He just doesn't seem to go away. He's just always there. Woods, you're up.
All right, I'm going to make the case for a player here who I want to give one more week of patience to, and I'm probably going to regret it as soon as I say it. But I'm not ready to give up on Kerryon Drake quite yet. I liked his tape last year. I mean, it's been a very disappointing start to the season for him. I think some of that's just due to weird game scripts for the Dolphins. I mean, in their last game, they ran, I think, 39 offensive plays. He had only 5 carries. It was just a bizarre game. You look back to last season, he had the best game of his career against the Patriots. That's who they play this week. He had 193 yards last season in one game. Career high 25 carries. Now, the concern is that's the most carries he's ever had in his career, including back at Alabama. He just hasn't been a volume guy. But, I mean, Frank Gore's not going to last forever. The Dolphins, I have some optimism for, but it's just been such a bizarre start to the season. I think people are sort of writing them off, even though they're undefeated. People are ready to write off Kerryon Drake. I want to see one more week out of him. I think there's a chance he shows something this week.
I mentioned Austin Eckler earlier in our Next Level Updates segment. I think he's definitely someone you could consider as a solid flex play, and people might not be giving him as much time as he should. I also brought up, I don't know if we mentioned Courtland Sutton earlier, but he's a guy that I think needs to be talked about this week. He's somebody who could get more targets as the Broncos are trying to keep up with the Chiefs in that game on Monday night. I also don't love what we're seeing from Demaryius Thomas. Seems like he's fading a little bit. I think Courtland Sutton is a guy who could come on as the year goes on. And if we want to go very deep for this, how about Cameron Meredith? He finally got activated last week. He played on 43% of the Saints snaps. That's only trailing Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn. He only had 1 catch, but it was an 11-yard touchdown. And this offense could use another playmaker. It appears Meredith is finally healthy. I think before the season, we thought he had a chance to step up, maybe even be the number 2. I think for now he has a chance to be the number 3. It's a bit of a long shot play, but if you're desperate, you could get him into your lineups. Jeff, that's it, man. I think we've helped give everybody a better perspective here on week 4. We definitely couldn't have done it without you. And I will say, before we let you go, you and I have developed a bit of a friendship over the years as we've interacted in the industry, and you have been great to me that whole time. I appreciate the conversations we've had, and I appreciate the conversation we had today.
Well, I appreciate you asking me on. That's nice of you to say, man. I will say this, going back to something you guys were talking about earlier. If I was walking around without my wedding ring on, my wife would not be very happy. So a little bit different over here. I have it on. I sleep with this thing. I shower with it. I'm going in the ocean with it. It's always on. So a little bit different for me. But, yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Well, on the one time that I did officially lose my ring, I woke up the next morning. My wife knew exactly where it was. So it was great. She had found it for me already, and that was fantastic.
Guys, if you want to take a break from your wedding ring, I highly recommend just suffer a debilitating finger injury that still hasn't healed like 2 years later. I mean, it's great, right? Yeah.
Make sure that you are following Jeff on Twitter, as we mentioned before, at Jeff Ratcliffe, and make sure you're checking out all of his content at Pro Football Focus. Woods and I are going to be back late Sunday night, as always, breaking down all the action from Week 4, and we're going to run through our early look at the waiver wire to let you know which players you are going to need to target next week. If you want to get in touch with Woods or explain why maybe he should just get his wedding ring resized so that he can still wear it, he is at David P. Woods on Twitter. Check out theScore app for all of our fantasy content, including my rankings. Those can help answer most lineup questions. If you still have any on top of that, hit me up on Twitter at Justin Boone. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Said leave on time, my baby said leave